Good morning, everyone. This is Emily.
Good morning, everyone. Justin here.
We want to welcome you to How to Convince Your Boss Your Brand is Stale. And we're really pleased that you're joining us this morning. Before we start anything at Root and River, we always like to set an intention. And so our intention, I'll just speak to mine, and then Justin obviously can speak to your intention. But just to share, my intention would be to share some tips on how to have a difficult conversation. Sometimes, we get so up in our head whenever we have to have a hard talk with somebody that we're not really making progress on the actual execution of the conversation. So looking forward to sharing some tips that should clear the clutter in your brain and make it a little bit easier.
Great. Yeah, my intention, I think, is that this is a real issue that marketing leads have, directors of marketing, CMOs, VPs of marketing, whatever, that they're being asked over and over again to market under, ridiculous, let's put it that way, conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the type of conversation that if you know how to have this conversation with your boss, it's career changing, but it's also legacy bending for the company. So it's a big deal to be able to. So my intention is that that you would feel empowered. So
That's a great one. Yeah. All right. So great. So a few little details before we get started here. We are going to be tweeting out little tidbits of information using the hashtag StaleBoss. So we invite you to share in that if there's anything that resonates with you. You can always use our handle at Root and River and find us at rootandriver.com for further discussion on the topic or any topic on branding that is of interest to you. We do have everybody on mute, but we will be asking you some questions, and so when we do that, we hope that you'll join in the chat window and share your thoughts with us, because we'd like to be as interactive as possible. And so that is all the housekeeping that we have. We also are recording this, and we will be posting it to our YouTube channel and sending it out to all the attendees. So rest assured you'll have that as well. Did I forget anything, Justin?
no, you were spot on.
All right, good. I like that. All right. So let's set the scene, shall we?
Yeah. So here's the scene. You and we're going to give you two, actually, because, well, you'll see. Scene number one is that you are a marketing director and you know the brand needs an update. So you are the protagonist in the story. The plot of the story is that the brand has gone stale, and yet your boss, let's say it's the CEO, seems to be completely unaware of that. It's one of the interesting paradoxes of unaware leaders, is that they seem to be very image conscious, but also don't seem to be very aware of their own behavior and thinking. And probably not coincidentally, they always have bad hair. I don't know why, but it seems to be true. The second scene is a scene where you're the boss. You're self-employed, you're a solo entrepreneur. And this is a conversation that you need to have with yourself, a little bit of an honest assessment of where you're at as a brand in this hyper-connected, hyper-competitive world that we live in today. And our goal today is that you can have those conversations with your boss or with yourself or both in a way that is thoughtful, intentional, and ultimately get you what you want, which is to do a rebrand. And Emily, this idea was born of some real-life scenarios that we both have faced in our corporate lives, correct?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that kind of brings us to current conversation. So we've both been in those situations where you have to have, as I mentioned earlier, that uncomfortable conversation about, hey, I know you think our brand is really on the money, but it's not. And it always stinks to be the bearer of bad news to your boss. Let's just put it that way. There's a lot of pushback too on something that in a business that doesn't seem to have a lot of urgency to it a lot of times in the mind of the leader. I know I've been in those conversations where I tried to broach this subject, and the the boss, the head honcho says, oh, yeah, we can do that later, or let's plan that for another quarter, or you know what, it's fine. There's also the moment where they just give you a blank stare that they don't even know, what you're talking about. Why do we need to undertake this project? It's not on fire. I hired a designer and paid good money 20 years ago for this logo, and it's fine. And that's probably what they think it's kind of all about. And another one that I've gotten before too is like, well, our clients don't care about our website. We have a nice client base, and they don't go to our website. Heard that one more times than I can count. And unfortunately, as you know, being on this webinar, that's just not true. Clients, prospects, connectors, stakeholders, investors, they are all visiting your website or your LinkedIn page, and when you have a stale and outdated brand, it's a very negative first impression, and it hurts. So yeah, those are some of the conversation tidbits. You have any to add?
Yeah, I think they're the external conversations, or maybe it's the lack thereof. And branding is about creating sustainable, authentic buzz in the marketplace. And the audiences, if they're not talking about you, are typically not going to be inspired to talk about you, because without some sort of, you got to give them a good reason. I don't know if you heard about the story of the Girl Scout Charlotte, who wrote the funny review of the Girl Scout cookies, and then has been on like 11 TV shows. She set the world record for Girl Scout cookie sales. Yes. And it was because she had an honest, authentic conversation about the brand. And our premise is that that's what branding really is. Now, you as directors of marketing, or if you're a solo entrepreneur, you just need to create the conditions for that conversation from the outside. But it starts, as Emily said, with an inside conversation.
That's right. And so we want to ask you in the audience, what have you heard? Like, what pushback have you heard in trying to have these conversations? Or if you're the leader, what have you told yourself about, undertaking a rebrand or brand refresh? So what are some of the things that you have been told, or how did the conversation stop in your case? And go ahead and type those into chat, and we can share those as we move along. One of the interesting things too, Justin, I think about conversations, and even as you were mentioning, authentic moments, I think the more that we as brands can have those authentic moments, the further that echo carries. Little case in point is, I'm sure I thought everyone in the world had seen the BBC video of the journalist being interviewed about Israel, and then his two kids kind of come in, and the mom comes in to pull them out of the room. But my dad hadn't seen it, and so I was explaining it to him, and he said, oh, now that guy's career is ruined. I was like, what are you talking about? This guy is on every show. He's being interviewed, everywhere, with the wife, with the kids, and it's a boon to his career. So because it's that authentic moment revealed, it's funny how, maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that would have been a career killer. Today, it's the beginning of a very authentic connection to that individual, and perhaps a boon to his career. So anyway, moving right along.
So we're going to dive into some practical tips for you, but before we do that, we're going to talk a little bit of brain science, as it were. So what we have, every human has this, and it's sort of this fog of BS and biases that we kind of carry around with us, and sometimes it's called your worldview or your perspective or your lens. It's all the same thing. We like the metaphor of fog because it's not a solid. It's it's fluid. You can pierce it to get to the truth. But this is where most decisions are made, especially related to things that we're uncomfortable with. And it's very, very important, in order to have this kind of conversation, you have to change your boss's perspective in order to get him or her to change her mind. It says thoughts trigger behavior, thoughts trigger action. And so what we're going to do, these tips are not necessarily designed to go debate style, toe to toe, even make the intellectual case for a rebrand. It's mostly how to speak to his or her heart below the bias, below the current worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those is this kind of a key starting point to this is you need to get on the same page with a definition of what a brand is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll toss it to you, Emily, for our favorite definition of a brand.
So we believe brands are your presence when you're not present. That's sort of our default definition. Brands are also the way the way something makes you feel when that thing, you have a authentic interaction with that company,
Mm-hmm.
that product, that service. So we try to tie, well, we know that brands are tied deeply to our emotions, and they are deeply ingrained in how we want to experience things. And those experiences are all at the deeper part of the brain. That's the pre-verbal part of the brain where all the emotions reside and where all the decisions are made.
Mm-hmm.
So brand is that experience, and it is there whether you are present or not.
And kind of a final thought before we dive into each of these tips is that you are speaking to you're speaking to your boss in a way that he or she may not be used to be spoken to, because
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be very convicting. And one of those things is that we love about branding. It's why we do what we do and do these type of webinars. Is your brand is the only way people experience what you believe, what your boss believes, or the collective character of the organization. A brand is one of the only ways that you get to experience that. Think of customer experience, product innovation, the way that level of customer service, that type of stuff. Those are all reflections. Those create the brand, that presence that Emily, that you said,
Mm-hmm.
but they are the result of a belief that resides in the heart of the leadership, and you got to get to it in order to change the perspective.
Yes. All right. So with that in mind, the first tip we have for you is to make it about standards. So what does that mean? So a lot of times when we're speaking to people maybe in a higher position or those that we want to influence or persuade, we sort of challenge them, but we don't make it about their own standards. So a standard is something that you set for yourself and you see as the right way of doing things. So even, I'm sure if your boss hasn't articulated these directly as in a list, he or she is probably using them as guideposts every single day, and there may be little phrases that they say that give you some insight into what their standard is. Maybe their standard is, I used to have a boss who was like, my company, a human being will always answer the phone, and that was his standard. So what you want to do is to take your argument and about branding and how it needs to be refreshed and make it about a cultural standard of the organization.
And
So
one of the things about that is, and the reason we have the Navy SEALs as an example here, you're looking at what's called Hell Week, essentially, and it's BUDS training is what they call it technically. And the Navy SEALs are an example, and you can use sports teams and basically any high-performing culture runs on standards, not policy. And the way that we like to say this, and your standard. The standard is the way we do things around here, and they're either high or low. There's not a lot of medium standards, and so in the sense of the Navy SEALs in that example, what we're emphasizing is that if your boss has a desire to have an elite organization, there's a certain way to do things in order to be seen as elite, and those things have to be consistently executed, even on the outer candy wrapper or the first impressions of an organization, in order for the brand to be taken seriously. So that's the kind of summary of why we have pictures of Navy SEALs doing push-ups.
all right, great. So to make the conversation about standards and to appeal to that point of pride, what you kind of want to say. So we have two things: the things you really want to say, like if you didn't have to filter anything, and then morphing that into what you should say. So you sort of want to say, you're better than this, or we're better than this, because the brand is so far lagging behind what it appears in the marketplace. The way it appears, like the actual organization and culture and values are awesome, but what's out there kind of stinks. We want to say, we're better than this. But one thing that you can try to say is that, I've been looking at the brand and I just feel like this isn't up to your standards. Make it about their world. And here's another one for a legacy organization. And we did have one person comment that they're an organization with a lot of legacy and a lot of pride, been in business for quite a while. So change at all, Justin, is like a threat to, or sort of an insult into the longstanding business. And I can totally relate to that. But if you kind of play off of that standard to say, this is not how you built the business, this is not, in keeping with the standards that you've set over these many years, and sort of appeal to them in that way and hold up that legacy and that pride that they have. Also, you can say, this doesn't reflect how awesome we are at this moment, and there's something that's not right about that. It's an injustice that I think we should fix, and I'm ready to lead the charge. Any other thoughts?
Exactly. I think that showing some empathy here is critical. So just using back to what we said earlier about bad hair, if you felt like if someone, a friend or someone you respected, was out of style, you likely wouldn't say to them, unless you were very close to them, "Hey, man, that hairstyle looks like it's from 1972." What you would do is you would be tactful and tactical in the way that you go about approaching this, and it requires quite a bit of, especially around this idea of standards, some very deft conversation jujitsu. And the other key point here with standards is that you can flip some of these to questions. Is this up to your standards? Mm-hmm. Do you think our brand reflects how awesome we are? Mm-hmm. Do you think that the business was built? Do you think do you want the business to grow beyond, continue to be relevant over the next 20 years? Those type of things. Then the question becomes the standard, and the question is actually more sticky than the statement, especially if you ask it with some empathy.
I think that's key, Justin, because the stickiness of a question, even in the moment, the leader may balk, they may bristle at that question and not answer it. But what I've seen is that it sticks with them, it stays with them, they kind of mull on it, it rolls around in their head for that next meeting, and suddenly they're bringing it up to you. That can be very effective. Great point.
And same as before, is what standards, you can post this in the chat as it comes to you or not, is what standards would you bring up with your boss or yourself, if you're the boss, that you'd want to trigger? What standards would you want to trigger a decision off of? The way we do things around here.
Great point. All right. Number 2.
So the second tip here is about attaching a rebrand to an existing business initiative. And a little bit of trivia, if you want to impress everyone in your life with trivia, or those that are impressed by trivia. What this person is doing is called skitching. And it's either on a bike or a skateboard attaching to some sort of motorized vehicle and getting towed along without getting caught by the driver.
Or getting killed by an
untrained driver. That's true. There's the mispractical aspect of this, yes.
Captain Sensible to you.
The Captain Sensible, exactly. Mispractical is her civilian rank. Yeah.
Oh, okay, got it.
So this idea then of attaching a brand to an initiative is basically like sketching. It's a form of coattailing. And what's interesting is, despite as dysfunctional as our government is, this is a fairly common thing in legislature at the federal and state and even local level, and they call them riders. And they're just additions to bills so that something can get pushed through, and maybe it's, especially around finance legislation for budget allocation. You get a writer that says you're going to fund arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico, or whatever. That's a form of legislative skitching. In the business world, it's so much easier to attach a uncomfortable conversation like a rebrand to an existing business initiative. Mm-hmm. So we're going to give you some tips on how to do that based off of actual conversations. So on one side, you have this, what you really want to say, what we sometimes we refer to as your two shots of tequila thing that you really want to say. And that's, we need to make this happen yesterday. And stop making me market without a strategy. Or some variation of, you're going to get, your unwillingness to work on the brand is going to cost me my job. Rather than say that, pick an initiative that's already going on in the company that you think you could sketch onto with the rebrand onto. For example, a growth initiative, that would be one. An innovation initiative. Hard to innovate if you got a crappy brand.
Another one would be a new product launch.
Yep, exactly. New product launch, a new service line, a new marketplace, and here's a big one, a merger or acquisition. But you can also create a business initiative by relanguaging. For example, if you're in an established company and you've had new competitors enter the marketplace, which most organizations have that, new competitors, maybe that are even better than you, it becomes an initiative to beat the competition as opposed to, hey, boss, we need to do a rebrand. So those are some examples, and there are many others that that you could probably and certainly tap into in your organization, even if you're a fairly small business. That you don't get to be a successful business, you don't get to be where your boss is without some level of success, which means that very few of them actually are sitting on their laurels, just waiting to retire. They're just focused on other areas like operational excellence or whatnot. So, what can you think of other initiatives, Emily, that they could look for?
Sometimes, in some cases, it could attach to cultural initiatives or team building initiatives, or perhaps a review of the hiring process. That's a very good one, because people who you are trying to attract, the talent that you're trying to bring in to the company, are today, as we all know, looking for different things inside of an organization than in the past, and one of those things is a strong brand that is beliefs-based. And so having an articulation of what the brand stands for, what it really means, why it was founded in the first place, is going to help tremendously with recruiting. We recently worked with a client who was a startup, and they're in high growth mode, needed the branding piece to come in line with the excellence going on in the rest of the organization to continue their growth and to attract more investors. What they didn't realize was that the first place that it was going to start helping was with their hiring and recruiting. And immediately when they were able to articulate the brand, what it meant, they just saw a massive increase in the talent that they were attracting. So people don't always think of that as a branding opportunity, but it definitely is.
I like that. I love that. One more before we move along is the succession plan initiative. If your boss, the owner, is thinking it's an active conversation about retiring or transitioning, that is an excellent time to have the conversation about about a rebrand, doing it around a succession plan or a leadership transition point. It's a hot, fertile ground to have that kind of conversation.
Awesome. All right, so tip number 3, show them the hard data. So this is one of my favorites, just because a lot of leaders, they will listen to you politely or not so politely, go on and on as the director of marketing or communications about the brand, but they don't really get it until you show them the numbers. And this one has worked really well for me. And just a word about how you do it. So sometimes I like to take the sneak attack approach. So whatever reporting I was doing, I would report the numbers, but sort of come at it through the lens of what does this say about our brand. Um, and whether it's a low visitor site, low visitors to the site, a decline in that, or it's a decline in the time spent on the site. And you pick your favorite stat and just continuing to put that stat out in front of people over and over and showing that it's really not changing can be very powerful. So
Yeah,
just some tips. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry about that.
No.
I think you got to find, as the image shows, you got to find the boulder in the road too. One of the big mistakes with data is sort of predictive data, and that's fine. It's good to do that. But what we're trying to do is change his or her perspective so that you can get what you want. And sometimes showing that giant boulder blocking the progress of the company from a data standpoint sets you up to have a much more specific, urgent conversation of what are we going to do about this information right now.
Good point. Yep. So what you want to say, something very snarky, like there's a reason no one is coming to our website because it sucks. Or you want to just kind of say the numbers don't lie, there's something that's not right about our presence here. So let's just turn that around a little bit. Leaders love the term ROI. So kind of pulling that idea of that the website could have a return on investment, or your social strategy, or your outbound strategy, whatever you have in mind. That branding ROI can be measured and given key performance indicators that, hey, this grand initiative is not going to go forward without being measurable and attainable, and you're going to be able to look at it and see how we've progressed. And here are the key performance indicators that I would suggest if we move forward with this project. A lot of leaders see marketing, branding, communication as an investment in nothing. They can't touch it. It's not necessarily that tangible to them. So providing some tangibility and some data to them will make it a lot easier to actually sell the idea of a rebrand or brand refresh. And then also just pointing out that there's a direct correlation between a strong brand and ROI. Ever heard of Disney, Ritz-Carlton, Apple? Pick your favorite brand that has that strong brand presence, and then all their products and services come under that. So just, again, trying to pair the idea of ROI with a brand initiative can be extremely powerful.
So similar to what we said about skitching in the previous one about attaching to an initiative, you can also attach to existing KPIs, existing key performance indicator or dashboard. And one of the things that marketers often struggle with, especially in smaller firms, is they're not seen as strategists. They're not seen as strategic thinkers. And that's because a lot of people in marketing get paid to execute. And you want to do strategy, but you're not given the opportunity because of how you're perceived. So one of the great ways to change that is to get very familiar and eloquent about the key performance indicators or dashboard that the owner or the senior leadership team is using to measure the performance of the company. And then extrapolate from there. Let's say that most dashboards there's 5 things that they're looking at. So they're looking at, if it's a business-to-business business model, they're looking at closing cycle time in the sales funnel. Well, if that's something that's important to them, you can attach that hard data to the brand initiative and say, hey, we will shrink the closing cycle if we have a more well-known brand with a greater presence in the marketplace. That's just one example.
Exactly. Building off of that, the latest statistic is that 80 to 90% of all research prior to a purchase, regardless of the industry, B2B, B2C, whatever industry you're in, occurs before your client ever makes contact with you. So that was a huge eye-opener for me, and it still is very powerful, and that's only going to grow. So what we look like online through referral is so vitally important. It is the sales cycle now.
Yeah. the last thing here, and before we move on, is its absence of data is data. So back to what we said about early on about conversations, external conversations in particular. If your organization is not producing buzz on social, you're not producing inbound leads or inquiries or whatever your sales funnel is, that's data. It's the absence of information that is creating the need for the rebrand. So sometimes the hard data is by showing them what's not there that should be.
Mm-hmm. Yep, very good point. Okay, next one.
So, a little comparison here, and this is where we begin to really dive into the conversation jujitsu that we often refer to of using very specific, authentic, but specific language. And in this particular case, it's a very, very simple thing, very, very simple, very, very powerful thing that has been used in conversations since the beginning of time, and that is comparison. And this is a sort of a healthy way to use comparison, because what you're doing is you're appealing to your boss's sense of relevance or sense of competitiveness by saying, hey, here are some companies that really get branding. I think we have something to learn from them. Or here's a competitor that is doing these unique things. And as long as it's stuff that you agree with, it's, you know, where maybe they've done the rebrand that you really do admire or you respect the way they went about it. In order to do this approach, to highlight these competitors or to do comparison, to compare, you know, popsicles and ice cream cones, it needs to be something that is authentic from you and believable to your boss, that it's doable, that this is a doable thing, not because the competitor had, you know, a much larger budget or they're a global organization or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. So from a conversation standpoint, you know, this goes back to what we really want to say is to your boss is our top competitors are kicking our ass at this. Mm-hmm. They look fresh, we look old, they look new, we look ancient, we look like our organization looks like the set from Brady Bunch. Whatever along those lines, and it can be so frustrating, especially when you as the head of marketing are being held to a standard, back to that word, of marketing performance, but the weight of being relevant is unfairly placed on you to come up with some sort of marketing lead gen strategies or inbound outbound campaigns where your competitors are more sophisticated and more sophisticated and more consistent.
Yeah, it's trying to fight with, you know, your hands tied behind your back in a lot of cases. That's what it feels like.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what you should say is use the language of opportunity or the language of what's possible. So this is a huge opportunity for us to knock our competitors down a few rungs. This is a great opportunity to take some market share. This is a great opportunity to really position ourselves. And a big one here is this is a great opportunity to show the world that we're better than them. Mm-hmm. And that kind of goes back to standards, but you can't do it without branding. Innovation is important, and speeds and feeds and features and differentiators around the feature set, those are important, but they don't drive the brand. What drives the brand is the experience and the way that you make people feel. So a couple that come to mind, a couple of things to look for in competition is, one is how mission-centric they are. If you have a competitor that's very mission-centric, they have a tremendous brand advantage because they are inviting people to not participate in their business model or product set. They're inviting their customers to participate in their mission. Mm-hmm. The second is they have a very sharp, heart-based message. So it's not, some BSE tagline or slogan or jingle or something, it's something that really resonates. And then the last one, and it's a little more difficult to dig into, but if you find it, it's evidence of where your competitors are at, and that is investment in marketing mechanization. So they are using Infusionsoft or HubSpot or Marketo or some tool to automate the marketing and sales process. And you can usually see that on their website on how they are interacting. And that's, again, you can go back to your boss and say, hey, this brand has a great mission, their message is on point, and their machine that they're building is kicking our butt. What are we going to do about it?
Yep. Yeah, and it's important too, I would just say on selection of who you're going to kind of put out there, that you try to select a brand that your boss respects, because it's very easy for them to dismiss somebody that they don't respect. But if it's somebody that they consider a worthy competitor, a worthy opponent, that may have a little more juice for you.
Exactly.
It's just a tip there. And this one flows really nicely into the next one, which is appealing to their ego. So, you know, leaders have egos. We all have egos, but leaders especially have egos. And essentially, if their brand is really lagging behind the market, there's a huge opportunity to appeal to their ego in a positive way to get them to bring it up to code. And that's what they're after, what we're kind of after here. So what you sort of feel compelled to say is that our brand sucks and you're the only one stopping progress. Again, if that leader is a person who is not allowing the initiative to go forward, it can be so frustrating. And it feels like your challenge as the director of marketing is to convince them to just do something about it. And you can also, I mean, you kind of want to say, you know, where are we going? You've built this company, you're not going to be here forever, and where will the legacy be? You can't brand after you're dead. But don't say that. Don't say that. What you should say is, you know, try to position the leader as contemporary. You know, even if they're maybe more aspirationally contemporary or they're basically stuck in the past, give them a vision of what a refreshed brand, a current brand could do for their own leadership. So you could say, you are a contemporary leader. We need to have a contemporary brand that reflects that. You understand the market. You've been here. You know the lay of the land. You've had the success. Let's show that a little bit more than we are. We can still be humble. We can still be respectful of our heritage and also show what a visionary you are. Huge ego play there. Mm-hmm. And it's true. It's not manipulative. It's just kind of reframing. Also, make it personal, right? Your legacy is very important to me. Let me help you build it. Again, going to the legacy, the fact that they are not going to be at the helm forever. And finally, you know, adding a little bit of urgency into the ego play. Hey, we're wasting time here churning about the brand question. Doing something is better than doing nothing. That's taken from one of my mentors and investors in my career, who used to say that constantly. You know, he would assess what the proposal was and mull on it for a while, and then eventually, let's do something, because doing something is better than doing nothing. And it's sort of leadership language, leadership lingo. A lot of leaders tend to really deeply believe this at a very core level. This little phrase of doing something in action. They have a bias towards action. Mm-hmm. So these would kind of help you appeal to the ego in a positive way. And you can also, as you pointed out before, flip them into questions, right, Justin?
Yeah, exactly. And one other just tip here is you got to show them the statue of themselves. Mm-hmm. Not every leader necessarily wants a giant statue in the town square, but even metaphorically, show them the statue, because their vision for the business is very heads down unless they're in the midst of some sort of succession plan or leadership transition. Mm-hmm. And they may have a 5-year plan, but there needs to be the statue of them at the end of this 5-year plan that says, here stood a contemporary leader who reintroduced his brand to thousands and thousands of new customers. You got to show them the statue. The second part of this is just like a record producer did with Elvis in 1968, when he took him out onto Sunset Boulevard and no one recognized him, and no one recognized Elvis Presley. So Elvis lost a bunch of weight, wore the black leather, and became famous again. And you need to create, and the key to this from an ego standpoint, just like the record producer did with Elvis, is you need to create the inciting incident that sparks the ego response. It's your job to create that moment.
Yes.
And sometimes it's a accumulation of everything that we've shared with you, especially around data and standards.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, to that point, Justin, I think setting up a time and a space, a lot of times branding initiatives, they happen in meetings that are about the health of the business, or they're kind of crammed in here and there. Set aside some time, set a dedicated meeting to do a little report on the health of the brand, and then engage the conversation, because it's just not as effective when it's done in the seam.
Yeah, exactly. And one just sort of a not so subtle plug is that we do a brand audit. It's like a 30-point checkup. I think it's 30 points. It could be 31 or 27, but it's extensive. And it goes in and it gives you a baseline for where the brand is at today around as Emily said, as you said, Emily, around the health of the brand.
That's
and
right.
Sometimes that's a great starting point to do something semi-non-threatening. Now, the information that's pulled from it might be threatening, but the activity itself is, it's quality control, quality assurance, and your boss understands that.
Absolutely, and a lot of that information is rooted in data. So again, it's that objectivity and that objective data that can really speak on a different level to the powers that be. All right, so once you've done all of this and your boss says, all right, yes, where do you start, right? That's the next kind of question.
Exactly. So there's where you start may be specific to your situation. Maybe you need to secure the budget, budget approval, or maybe you need to do the brand audit. Maybe you have to do some things to sort of set the table for success. But there are 3 areas, and we'll each provide some flavor here about this because, again, of our real-world experience on the corporate side or on the business side, being in your shoes of being, heads of marketing. And I think the first one is you need to get clear expectations. It goes back to the worldview, get below the fog to find out what's really important to your boss. So a great question to ask your boss related to expectations is, how are you measuring the success of this venture or initiative? How are you measuring it? And the second question to ask there with expectations is, what's important to you during this process? And if you can continue to provide that to your boss during the process of the rebrand, you're managing their expectations along the way. And a common thing that happens, though, is that rebrands end up being like doing a kitchen remodel without telling your partner you were going to do it. And then they're like, why is the kitchen a mess, and when is this going to be done? So you want to manage the expectations from the very beginning.
I would just add, the discussion that we had earlier about setting those KPIs. What if you created a personal dashboard, sat down with the leader, or if you are the leader, sit down with yourself. What are the 3 or 4 KPIs for you personally that are going to show progress and then show that it was worth it? So just some more ideas somebody sent in. Social media engagement, leads received, speaking opportunities that the leadership is invited to. Those could be some of them, but make them as personal as you can to the leader so that they can also see progress throughout.
Yeah, go ahead and speak to the second one, Emily. I mean, this is something you've been excellent at your entire career.
Thank you. That's very nice. Assemble your team. So you are not going to be able to do this alone. And it's not just the people who are maybe directly going to be working with you on it, whether it's marketing specialists or social media managers, but a kind of a wider team of people who see what you see and believe what you believe about the brand. So do a little campaigning in or around your environment to decide who those people are and kind of get them on board to help support the project, because you will run into barriers, you will run into roadblocks. There will be people who do not like the change just because it's change, or because it's in a political environment, because it's led by you, what have you. You're going to need your tribe. You're going to need your squad. So go ahead and start building that team of people, again, beyond just your tacticians, that across the organization that see what you see and believe in the mission of the rebrand.
And some other thoughts on assembling your team is, think of it informal. Yeah, I like how you use the word squad. It's like your informal tribe, and it could be outside resources, as you mentioned, Emily, but it also could be people that are often overlooked as having impact on the brand. And three in particular, depending on the size of your organization. If the person is responsible for revenue or sales, if that's not you, make sure that you get that person on your side for this initiative because it has a direct correlation to the performance.
Yes.
Number two, the head of HR. The head of HR has actually, in many organizations, the head of HR has more impact on the brand than the marketing people do because they're responsible for culture. Mm-hmm. And then the third person to get on your side is someone that's on the front lines. It could be in customer service, it could be a field tech, depends on your business model. But the people on the front lines, they know the conversations. They're not, you know, they're so maybe softly aware that there's this brand initiative going on, or maybe the website sucks and you're going to change it or whatever. But they are the ones that hear the day-to-day chatter on the phones out in the field. And having one or two of those in your pocket as an influencer and an internal ambassador will help make your team more robust. And what you'll get is you'll get a team of experts, people that understand how to do mission, message, and marketing machine, but you also get a team of ambassadors that you've recruited to get things done.
Yep, absolutely. Good.
And the last one here is get some objectivity. Some of that objectivity comes from don't be afraid to ask for help. And I mean, this is our business model. We're coaches. We're not an agency. We don't come in and prescribe a whole bunch of tactics and then charge you to do them. We're coaches, and we do that because of our own experience on the other side, on being in your shoes, that we didn't get a lot of coaching when we brought in consultants or agencies. What we got was lots of paper and lots of ideas and very little execution.
A lot of directing. You do this. You do this.
Yes, exactly. A lot of directing. That's a good point. And so the other aspect of objectivity is this is where using things like a focus group or a listening group and get feedback, get constant feedback from the people most affected by the rebrand. And obviously that's employees, but it's also certainly customers, shareholders, influencers in the community. If you can facilitate those conversations, you're going to continue to get this infusion, like a vitamin B12 shot, infusion of energy and information to you as you go along, so you don't get too caught up in the bubble of the rebrand. It also is very good for your personal brand as a leader. The more people you get involved, the more people will see you as a strategic thinker.
Absolutely. And I think 2 and 3 sort of play together. So as you're assembling that team and you're recruiting that tribe of believers, this is a great opportunity to get their immediate objectivity, if they're outside of your business unit, on the brand as it is, and that will help as well. They're not totally objective because they're still part of the organization, but they will have a different perspective that should be refreshing for you. All right, so that brings us to question and answer time. So we are happy to take your questions. Go ahead and type any questions that you might have into your chat or your questions panel, and we will do our best to answer those. And we also wanted to ask you a question, just if you have been in this situation before yourself, what has worked for you? What strategies have you used to further the conversation about rebranding, and what has been effective?
And as you think about what questions you might want to ask, there are some common questions that we get as it relates to a rebrand. And the first one is, what budget should I have? And so it's a highly contextual question. When you are, the easiest way to do this is to assign budget to tactics, and then use the strategy and the consulting or the coaching piece of it as ways to execute that. It's sometimes, if you're trying to get budget approval and you go to your boss and say, well, we want to spend 15 grand to bring in these people from Root and River to help us with our brand, they're like, well, what are you going to get? What are we going to get for that? So if you it's sort of the exact opposite of marketing execution. Is the way you get budget approval is you talk about the various budgets for the various marketing pieces, website, social, events, content creation, all those pieces. And you build your budget out from there, and then you still get that coaching element approved as well, because you're just sliding it in as part of the overall budget.
Mm-hmm.
There is a baseline that I've heard, and maybe you've heard this too, Emily, is that your marketing budget should be 1 to 3% of your revenue. And so you can look at current revenue and assign a number off of that and ask for that number. So if your business is doing $5 million a year, ask for 1% of that to do a rebrand, and you can use data to support that. That's a reason, that's a minimum level of marketing competency for an organization.
We have a couple other questions coming in too. What's a typical timeline of a good rebrand? How long should it take? This varies quite a bit, but if you already have an internal team that's ready to execute, a rebrand can take anywhere from 3 months to 12 months. Mm-hmm. But within that year time frame, you should be able to roll out the new brand. And sometimes, like I said, 3 months, it could be a lot shorter if you get clarity around your beliefs, your behaviors, your standards very early, and then are able to move forward cohesively from there. Once you have that mix in place, it can kind of flow pretty rapidly if your team is ready.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Another question that came through is, what are some rebranding mistakes to avoid? We'll just go quickly since we're getting close on time, just a couple from each of us. Number one is tactics without strategy. A very common mistake. We're going to do a rebrand. I'm going to hire a designer. We're going to get a new logo, or we're going to get a new website, and it's completely detached or non-existent to the strategic plan for the brand. That's probably the number one mistake that I've seen over the last 15 years of doing this. How about you, Em? What have you seen as the top mistake to avoid?
I think just keeping it oversimplifying. Well, let's create a new logo and then that'll be enough. It's not always the case. It tends to be, if you do have a refreshed logo, I'm not against that at all, obviously, or a new logo, that's great, but that is really it's icing. It's not the cake. So unless there is some deeper level discussion about what the brand means, it just doesn't have the longevity that a full rebrand that goes to the root would have.
Yeah. Right.
Another question that we're getting is, well, what happens if you try all this and it doesn't work? What happens if the boss is not on board, and what do you do then? Or if another question that came in is, if the boss is on board but the rest of the leadership is not.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think the first one is, it's just my opinion, but where are you using your skills where you're not appreciated? Mm-hmm. If you're a contemporary thinker, some other organization might benefit from your knowledge and expertise. The second one is really, though, this idea of the other people are not on board. I think it's the key to that is find the quiet one that agrees with you and get him or her to endorse the idea. It's not going to be the loud people that disagree that you're going to try to flip. It's going to be the quiet one. And I'll tell you, it's often the CFO. The CFO may be initially reticent, or your controller, VP of finance, whatever their title is. They may be initially reticent to this because it's an expense and that's how they see the world. But once they understand the data and the ROI and the intention, they're going to be one of the biggest champions for a rebrand in the organization.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, that's a really good point. And if you've done your work of showing that hard data in the right light, you'll get them. You really will.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I think we've addressed all the questions that have come in, and we have a couple more minutes. We are going to be offering another webinar on April 25th, so mark your calendars, and we'll send out a note about this in the recording. It's called How to Be an Awake Leader. So whatever level you're at doesn't mean necessarily you have to be the leader of the entire organization, but whatever level you're at, you know, being awake, being aware to the current conditions and the forces in the world and in the environment and in your role will make you a better leader. So we're going to give you some tips and have some great discussion on what being an awake leader is all about, and we really hope you join us.
And we always love to improve. And so if there's kind of two things on that. One is if there's something, one or two things we could have done to make this content even more rich for you, just drop us a note. You can go to our website and just fill out our contact form or email us at humans@rootandriver.com. And the second part of that is if there's a particular topic that you think your organization would like to hear inside the company, we do offer an internal, basically an internal brand lab, where we come in and we can do a lunch and learn, a half-a-day retreat, and really partnering with you, change the perspective of leadership in your organization about brand, especially the way we do it when we attach it to these mega trends, what we call natural forces that are sweeping the world right now. So if you like this topic or you like our message and want to bring us in, we do offer that as well. And like I said before, we also have the brand audit and root sessions available to go once you're ready to get started.
Absolutely. And once again, if you missed it in the beginning, we will be uploading this webinar to our YouTube channel, so check that out. And we'll also send it out to all the attendees who have registered. And feel free to forward this on, share with whomever you'd like to share it with, and we're happy to, again, answer any questions that might have come up for you as the day goes on. So thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.